and always with an eye towards an understanding that if we want to make a difference, if we want to make an impact on the world around us and the challenges that we see, one of the single most important ways that we can do it is with our diet. And one of the most effective ways of doing this is on an institutional level, where you change the policy of an institution, you change the diet of everybody there. In addition, we live in a particularly cruel world right now, a particularly harsh world. And I think any opportunity that we have to bring a little bit of kindness and compassion into this world should be jumped on. And so what I would also suggest is that this is a way that we can do that. This is a way where we can show ourselves that we can be vessels of light and kindness and love.
So Staten Islander News is here today with Rabbi Jonathan Bernhard. Rabbi Jonathan Bernhard is a rabbi with 25 years in the pulpit. He brings a wide range of experience, skills, and knowledge to his roles as Director of Clergy Engagement at the Center for Jewish Food Ethics. In his work, he nurtures relationships with clergy through direct outreach and education about the intersection of Jewish ethics, food, and sustainability. Outside of work, he is crazy about English Premier League soccer, fostering mama dogs and their puppies, raising chickens, and playing ukulele. So good afternoon, Jonathan. It's great to have you with us.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here.
So can you please tell our readers a little bit about yourself and your journey to a plant-based diet?
Well, as said in the introduction, I had the pleasure and honor of serving a congregation here in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles for 25 years. Over the course of that time, when I was in the pulpit, food issues became more and more of an issue for me. My family had various vegetarians, and I was vegetarian on and off for many years. And by the time I got to my congregation, I was vegetarian. The congregation knew it. It was sort of an ongoing kibbutz with the congregation. But over time, my understanding of what it meant to keep kosher, my understanding of what it meant to be able to consume the resources of this world in an ethical manner, they grew and my awareness grew. And about 6 years ago, my wife and I made a decision to go plant-based in our eating. And that opened up a whole bunch of interesting doors and challenges for me, and it brought it more and more into my congregational work, gave sermons on it. We had a meatless Monday tradition in our congregation following a sermon that I gave. And then after 25 years, I decided I wanted to find a different way of serving in the Jewish community. I loved my congregation. 25 years in one place was time to move on, and I had the opportunity to begin working. Right. So as I said, I'd served in a congregation for 25 years, and over the course of that 25 years, I'd started the congregation as a vegetarian because I'd been concerned about what was a proper way of consuming resources of this world, and what did it really mean to be kosher. But it's something that grew over time. I didn't speak about it a lot, but more and more when I was in my congregation, it became more and more important to me. And then after Postville and the debacle that occurred at this kosher slaughterhouse became much more important. And then about 6 years ago, my wife and I took the plunge to being plant-based. And over time, I continued to speak more and more about it within my pulpit. I gave a sermon where I tried to convince everyone to go meatless on Mondays. And when I left my congregation after 25 years, it was really with an opportunity and an eye towards doing just something different in the Jewish community and how to serve. And an opportunity came to work in I guess you could call it the Jewish animal welfare diet change space. I'm not quite certain exactly how to what terminology to use for this particular group of institutions and organizations here. And I've been working in this space now for 3 years, and always with an eye towards an understanding that if we want to make a difference, if we want to make an impact on the world around us and the challenges that we see, one of the single most important ways that we can do it is with our diet. And one of the most effective ways of doing this is on an institutional level, where you change the policy of an institution, you change the diet of everybody there. And then you influence or you open up the possibility of influencing people's dietary choices when they leave your institution, especially if one is clear and communicative as to why one is serving the kind of food one is serving. And so that opportunity to kind of make
And
that kind of difference was wonderful for me.
when you say institutions, do you mean like hospitals? Are you talking about like what kind of institutions do you mean that
Well,
you're talking about like kind of
the work that we do at the Center for Jewish Food Ethics is working with Jewish institutions, synagogues, JCCs, federations, schools, advocacy organizations, basically anywhere where there's food being served. We work
hmm
with those institutions through educational programming, through all sorts of different options that we give them to support them, to try to move them to create food policies that reduce their consumption of animal products.
Okay. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because like what you were saying, I was just kind of trying to clarify what kind of institutions you meant. So, um, I was thinking of like the JCC and things like that because they actually the JCC by us just recently put in like a new kitchen, I think, or something like that, on Staten Island. So so yeah, they do serve a lot of people in their kitchen as well.
Right. All of these institutions,
So
thousands of meals.
thousands of meals, yeah. So and when you say like institutions, I guess that would apply to the people who work there and the people who are receiving the services.
Well, we would hope that it would impact everybody who walks in the doors of an institution, whether they're working there, receiving services, or just visiting for a bar mitzvah. Right? Imagine walking into a kiddush. And in that kiddush, you're presented with two different tuna options because we know the Jewish community does not live on anything but tuna fish. Right? And then one
hmm
of those is regular tuna, one of those is a chickpea-based tuna. Right? And then we as an institution
hmm
share, well, here's the traditional tuna salad, but this chickpea-based one actually saves X amount of water and avoids X amount of pollution and does Y, all of these things, right? We're looking to influence everybody who walks into that institution.
Right. And so from like a sustainability standpoint, there's a lot like what you were saying about how it like saves that much over the actual regular tuna fish, in other words.
Exactly, exactly. And from our point of view, there's any number of reasons that the Jewish community should consider these kinds of changes. A strong part of it for us is, goes to how it is we're meant to treat other sentient creatures with whom we share this world. And what our tradition says about that, and
Okay.
are we living up to our tradition? Right. And then the other issue is sustainability, right? Can we actually keep
Right.
eating the way that we're eating? To which most every scientist seems to say, no, this is not a sustainable,
Right.
right?
Right. Exactly.
From our point of view, there's much to be gained to be for doing this, and there's many reasons from a Jewish perspective to do it.
Okay. And so I wanted to ask if you can please detail some of the Torah verses that specifically describe the commandments of compassion towards animals.
Absolutely. Look, there's there's a lot of different verses. Um, I mean, there's verses, for example, in the Ten Commandments, right? There's a verse right there. One is meant to allow one's animals to observe Shabbat, to engage in rest in the same way that human beings are. And in that commandment, we understand, and in their need for rest, what the Torah reflects is that the other animals with whom we share this world are just like us. They're sentient creatures,
Right.
feel what we feel. They understand and move through life in their way, and they have their means of communications, but their experiences in terms of pain and joy and tired, exhaustion, are just like ours. Right. So that's a I think a wonderful verse. There's verses about when you see when you see a donkey that's been that's weighed down by a burden and crushed by it. Even if it's your enemy's donkey, you have to go and help. There's verses that talk about not hooking up animals that are of different strengths because it is cruel to those animals. But my favorite verse for talking about this is actually comes from the book of Genesis, from chapter 1, verse 26, where it talks about human beings made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of the divine. And then the very next phrase, it's not even a different verse, it's the very next phrase goes, and you shall hold sway over the animals, right? And that verse to me speaks so clearly to what Judaism understands is the proper relationship. We're meant to take care of, to hold sway, to rule, not rule as in crush, but rule the way that God would rule, like a beneficent king, like someone who sees to one's charges, right? So, from our point of view,
Right.
in order to be created in the image of the divine, rests entirely upon how well we treat all the other sentient creatures in this world. If we do it well,
Mhm.
we are reflecting the image. If we do it poorly, we are not.
So, when you were and actually, so I wanted to ask you about Proverbs 12:10, which the translation that I found says, "A righteous man knows the needs of his beast, but the compassion of the wicked is cruelty." And can this apply to like the currently practiced factory farming kind of methods, which is somewhere around like 92 to 98% of the meat that's produced is produced from factory farms?
Yeah. Um, well, listen, I'd feel sort of a failure as a rabbi if I couldn't take any verse that's given to me and apply it to something. Um, you know, that's how we're
Right.
trained. This one does allow, well, it'll make it fairly straightforward. Just looking at the first part, the righteous person knows his animal, right? The word there for know, the Hebrew verb there is lada'at. And that because there's different words for knowing in Hebrew. And to know someone in this way is a very intimate kind of knowledge. And so the first thing the verse says to us is that the proper relationship with other animals is one where one truly knows them and is not so distant from them. Right? Our factory farming practices allow us to be very, very, very far away from our sources of food,
Right.
which I think many people would assume is pretty deliberate on their part, right? So one of the things that we know is that from the point of view of Jewish tradition, if one's going to consume other animals, one has to be intimate in terms of awareness of those animals and not so distant from them. And the second part, where the cruelty is compassion, I think that does actually really apply to factory farming because it is a cruel system, right? The people who are involved, the individuals in it, are not cruel individuals. I don't think. But I think I think it is a cruel system. So within a cruel system, when the cruel system says, no, no, listen, we're cutting off their beaks for their own good so they don't hurt one another. Well, that might look like compassion, because they're trying to make sure they don't hurt one another, except they're only doing that because they've set up a completely untenable and inhumane situation for them in the first place. So there where they
Mhm.
say, oh, we're doing something good, not really, because the context in which you're doing it is an awful one. Oh, we're going to pump them full of antibiotics so they stay healthy. Well, you're only pumping them through those with those antibiotics because the living conditions you have are so unhealthy for them. So it sort
Mhm.
of looks like they're taking care of them, but really not. And so even though I don't think the verse is necessarily written with factory farms in mind, I think there's what in the verse about what it teaches us that allows us to bring a very critical lens and an appropriately critical lens to factory farming.
Because there's so much information, and we'll definitely like put some of it in the article and possibly just like I don't know if you've ever heard of We Animals Media, I think it's called, where they have like free to use pictures of investigative I guess videos of these places with just they just like were wearing a chest cam, a camera hidden very well or whatever. So they were just documenting what was going on and how horrible it was for the animals.
Yeah.
And that's something that's yeah, like whatever the percentage is, it's over 90% that they use that they do that. Um,
By the way,
and actually the other verse,
I was gonna say
sorry.
our estimate is close to 99% of anything, any animal product in a supermarket comes from a factory farm.
Oh, in
Right?
the supermarket,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes.
It's impossible to avoid.
And there was something that you mentioned before about a slaughterhouse. Not actually familiar with that story.
Oh,
Where you were talking earlier.
so in I think it was in 2008, there was a very big and important kosher slaughterhouse called in Postville that was the source of meat for Rubashkins, which was a popular kosher meat, and it got raided. If you look it up online, a lot of material. Now the raid, interestingly, importantly enough, was not for the four-legged animals who were being slaughtered. The raid was for the workers. It was an immigration raid, right? And in part because these workers were being treated so poorly, right? And one of the things we have to understand about the factory farming system, right, is it's not just terrible for the animals who are being slaughtered, right? It is terrible for the workers and for the people who work under the conditions. And those investigative reports have shown exactly how poor those conditions are, how poor the training is, how poor the benefits are, right? And how grueling the work is. So this is a system that's unjust across the board to all animals, let alone the earth that we all live on. So it's a very interesting
Right.
debate. It had some real reverberations in the Jewish community and caused a lot of soul searching as to how it is that we do what we do.
And was it that like the immigration raid ended up uncovering other things that were happening to the animals and stuff like that? Like or it was just like for immigration and was just about the labor issues at that time.
At that time, I'd have to go back and double check. I believe the raid itself was focusing was focusing on immigration. Um, but it brought to the fore all these other issues. And I suspect, by the way, we don't know the what goes on, which is we know what's happening, but we don't want to know. So we know enough to know that we're not going to look or pay attention to anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that raid started to make it really, really difficult to do that on a number of levels.
And you had discussed Genesis 126 and 127. So kind of like the original relationship between humans and animals was meant to be like what you had said at first before about that kind of relationship between humans and animals as um, not rulers, but there was something else that you had used before.
Well, the verse itself says, and you shall have, I mean, it can be translated a number of ways. You shall rule over, you shall have dominion over. People are uncomfortable with that language because the way it gets interpreted. So there's other translations that'll say you shall hold sway over. Either way, however you translate it, it's pretty clear from the point of view of Jewish tradition that our tradition requires that we treat all creatures with a certain level of compassion and understanding and care that we're obligated to do this. And in Jewish
Hmm.
tradition, when we talk about ruling, the ultimate ruler is God, right? God is sort of like the
Hmm.
ultimate king, if you will. And so you're meant to rule the way
Hmm.
you'd expect God to rule. Well, how do you expect God to rule? Well, you go back to ancient times. Look, as Americans, you use the word king and monarchy. These are not words that resonate well in in our political tradition. But you go back a couple thousand years, right? And kings and leaders were defined by the way they took care of their people. That's why in Jewish tradition, all of our leaders, our early leaders, they're all shepherds. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, they're all shepherds, right? And part of how why they're seen as being qualified to rule is how well they take care of the animals in their care,
Hmm.
right? So when you see that verse and it says to have dominion, to rule, to hold sway, however you look at it, it's placing a responsibility on those of us with the power to take care of those who
Hmm.
don't. And then you read the rest of the Torah, and it does not allow cruelty to animals. And the way the rabbis interpret it, you have to feed the animals first before you feed yourself, which I got to tell you is not fun for me in the morning. I want my coffee and cereal before I have to feed my dogs and chickens, but you see it in so many different ways. And so it's pretty clear that it doesn't mean dominion rule, you can do anything you want. It means dominion rule, you got to take care of.
Right. And actually, from what you say, like put them first before yourself,
In some
as
ways,
like
yes.
I guess like a good ruler would do. Like when people think of like a good ruler, that's I guess yeah.
Yeah. If your people are hungry,
It's
you're as a
interesting.
ruler, you don't eat your banquet. You give to your people. That's
Right.
what a good ruler does, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's the attitude and approach. That's what Judaism and that's what the Torah is talking about here. So and rabbinic tradition, which comes after the Bible, will pick up on that and accentuate that element of it.
Right. Right. And can you also talk about in Genesis where it said where God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, and they shall be yours for food," as I guess the original desire for humankind and the proper diet that they were going to be like wanted to have?
So it's an
Or
interesting
if you could just like expand on that verse.
No problem. So it's an interesting question. Does that verse in the end of Genesis chapter 1 indicate the ideal diet, right? That human beings were basically meant to be plant-based, right? And one can
Mhm.
make the argument that it is. The only problem with that is all the other animals, lions, tigers, and bears, etc., were also commanded to be plant-based in the next verse, right? So this could be seen as a statement about diet, potentially, or it could be seen as a statement of an idyllic vision that the Torah has of a world being able to sustain itself without any suffering, right? And I think, in a sense, it kind of speaks to that kind of vision of a world of complete peace rather than necessarily being
Mhm.
the advocating for a plant-based diet. But different ways of interpreting it. And so I look at it as in the latter, but I understand why people are like, oh, I see, we're all meant to be plant-based. And then as you
That
go
makes
on,
sense.
right, and then you
Um,
go on later, right, and you get to Genesis chapter 9, and there we're given explicit permission to be able to consume animals, right?
right.
And
And
there, I
actually, yeah, that was
was gonna say, and there
and
the
there what?
And there, I think what you see is from the Torah's point of view, what it's really trying to get across about diet, right, is yes, you can eat animals, but it's a concession. We don't like it. And so if you're going to do it, you're going to do it under some very, very specific and very restrictive circumstances because we'll let you do it. But it's okay.
Right.
It's as I said, it's seen as a concession to human beings, not not necessarily what the ideal was from the Torah's perspective.
One of the reasons why I had wanted to ask about that other verse in Genesis 9 where it says, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses, I give you all these. And that's actually used a lot as like an argument when there are protesters who are, holding up signs with slaughterhouse pictures, like actual slaughterhouse pictures. I wouldn't want to end up being on a train where they were happen to be. Like it's kind of gross and graphic and stuff, but that's one of the arguments that people use when talking to those kinds of when talking to the protesters and stuff. So I
Right.
did want to ask you about that as well because of the permission and stuff is seen as almost like instruction or as like that's what's wanted, now after that time.
Yeah. You're saying, so one of the things that Heather that I point out is that you can find biblical verses for anything.
Yep.
And I know people in certain parts of this country are really impressed if you can quote something from the Bible to prove something. But the reality is not that hard. Not that hard. Just it's the context that matters. And here the context is such that holding that up as a sort of a justification for slaughterhouses is kind of missing the point.
Right. Okay. And then can you talk a little bit, or maybe some detail about what the kosher dietary laws and requirements are, and is it possible to keep kosher laws in the current factory farming environment?
Sure. So, talking about what it means to keep kosher is a incredibly complex and long conversation. There's some basic rules that people are aware of, that separation of milk and meat, right?
Hmm.
People are like, oh yeah, kosher, that's what they associate it with. And then there's also, cooking, what you can cook things in and so forth. But there's also a section of, okay, this animal has to be slaughtered in a certain way, right? So it's not just the cooking per se or what you mix it with, but it's also just the way the animal is slaughtered has to be done in a particular way. And it is believed that the way that it is being done is a manner that is as humane as possible. Right. And so when people talk about whether meat, let's say, is kosher, what they're specifically saying, or when you go into the supermarket and you say, oh, it says kosher on this packet of meat, what that's basically saying to you is that according to some rabbi, this animal is slaughtered in a manner that is fitting for Jewish tradition. Right. However, what it doesn't talk about is every moment of that animal's life from birth to death. And many people don't think of that as being something that Jewish tradition cares about, because what is technically kosher is only dealing with the actual slaughter. As it happens, Jewish tradition has quite a lot to say about how we're meant to treat animals from the moment of their birth to their death. And therefore, when one looks at a factory farm system, it is simply impossible to understand how anything that comes from a factory farm could in any way be okay to eat, whether you say you use the term kosher or not, right? Because Judaism does talk about, and it is a commandment, it's an obligation, just like keeping Shabbat or giving charity, right? That you cannot treat animals cruelly. And so we violate that commandment in those factory farms. Now, some of us say the term kosher should apply to that as well, right? To the treatment of the animal from its birth to death, in which case it wouldn't technically be kosher either. But the fact is, you don't need the technicality and you don't need the tradition and you don't need some rabbi to tell you. You simply look at what's done in a factory farm. And if you can look at that video and you can say, well, that's okay, that's not so bad, then you're looking at a different world than I am.
Mhm. So I guess would it be like something where if somebody is in doubt about this kind of situation, there's so much, I guess, evidence of it all at this point that it's kind of impossible to ignore. And they should actually go and look at the videos and see if they can still kind of like still participate in that. Like once you watch the videos, once you actually learn what's happening on the other side, I guess, of the grocery store shelf, you know.
Well, look, that's one way. That's one way to change people's behavior, and some people are affected by that. You say, look, I'm going to show you this video. It's not a total gross you out kind of thing, but it shows you enough so that any human being should be alarmed, right?
Hmm.
However, my experience, the experience of a lot of people, is that people watch videos and move on,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? It's not like everyone who watches one of those videos is like, oh, well, I'm plant-based now, and if they are, it tends to be a spasm, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't last because nothing around them is providing the necessary support to really affect diet change.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, look, and let's understand. I think it's pretty clear from our culture, right, how hard it is for people to change to go on a diet, to actually change their eating. I mean, we see it every January 2nd,
Right.
right? It is
Exactly.
it is incredibly hard. Just individual saying, I'm going to change my diet for whatever reason. I want to lose weight. I want to get healthier. I want to eat more ethically, whatever, right? That is really hard to do. We know that.
Hmm.
And so videos are good. Education is good. Awareness is good. Policy change, the institutions, the food that we're serving that we don't even think about. That is also a vital way of being able to not only have people literally eat differently,
Hmm.
but to use it as a stepping stone for their own awareness and growth.
Right. Yeah, that I mean that definitely makes sense. And we were actually talking to we had spoken to the head of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. He was the media coordinator for there. And he was also a cardiologist. And he was talking about how like a person would come in and they just had open heart surgery because they smoked cigarettes, and they got heart disease from it. And so as he's walking to them to their car, they light up another cigarette. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's very hard to get people to really want to change their habits. Um, and
Exactly.
but to be able to and so like I guess what you were talking about like with institutions and stuff and other organizations like that, it seems like that would really be a good way to number one use less meat like because like from a sustainability perspective if you want to, I don't know, you were talking earlier about how it's more sustainable, also not to eat meat because of the resource usage and how much resources go into all of these different um,
Ah,
factory farming methods. So I know a lot of people are really
depending
not
on which.
very aware of that.
Yeah, and which is really interesting because I have to tell you, if you look on the cover, the New York Times or the LA Times, all these newspapers right now, they've been doing series of articles on, let's say, the rainforest and how chunks of the rainforest are being cut down every minute of every day, clearing space in order to create farmland, to then raise cattle,
Hmm.
right? Or farmland to create the grain to feed the cattle.
Right.
Right. And by the way, it's interesting, the factory farm system, people praise it as a very efficient system for delivering large amounts of meat, right? But you step behind the veil, right? And you got to understand it is a brutally inefficient system, right? So to give you an example, just as like a small little statistic that I always kind of glom onto, for every 100 calories of feed that you give to an animal, you will get at the end of that maybe 17 calories worth of food and protein.
Hmm.
in terms of meat.
Okay.
You're putting in more than you're getting out, just in terms of calories,
Right.
right? Let alone the awful water usage, the polluting of the resources, the wasting of the land resources, and on top of it, just the outright cruelty to the animal, along with the injustice that's heaped upon the people working in these environments.
Hmm. Hmm. Because they're so when you were talking about earlier that there was an immigration raid, I guess that would imply that they were undocumented um, individuals who they were trying to like, I guess, did they end up like arresting the workers and like actually removing them from the situation?
I believe they arrested some, but they also went after the owners of the business. They arrested them. Yeah,
Okay.
you can't be doing this. And you can't be hiring these people and you can't be treating them this way. They got schmeiced all around. Right? There was nothing that they were doing that was ethically okay as soon as they got in there. For anybody, it seems.
Right. And then so what are some of the we talked a little bit about well, you talked about putting in 100 calories and getting out 17. And then you mentioned the water usage. What is that kind of ratio? I don't actually remember. Like it's a very high amount of water that they use.
Well, oh yeah. Well, here again, just to kind of concretize it down to something we all understand. It takes about 400 to 450 gallons of water to make a hamburger.
Okay.
It takes two to create a Beyond Burger.
Takes 2 gallons of water to create a Beyond Burger. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So you walk down where I live in Los Angeles, you walk down the street in the summer, right? And I mean, because I mean, I know we've been having fires now, but we get heat too in the summer. And you walk down and you see brown lawn after brown lawn, right? Because we're going on, we've had to conserve water. And you realize, oh, I can conserve over 400 gallons of water if I just eat a Beyond Burger,
Mhm.
right? It's a powerful argument. But even so, it's as clear as that is, many people will struggle.
Yeah. And one of the I had spoken with the with Dr. Pippin from the PCRM about this as well was that most people don't have someone who's supporting them in their environment. Like even if it's just one person, if your significant other says, "No, I'm not going to do this," like I was reading a story
Mhm.
of of another rabbi online who he wanted to go plant-based, but his wife said that if he didn't eat fish, she wasn't going to cook for him anymore, and he didn't. He was a terrible chef himself, so he just became like a pescatarian instead of a vegetarian or plant-based or anything like that. So when you have somebody who's doing it with you, it makes it so much easier. I've known so many people who have used just on a like related to weight loss and how, changing your diet just for that. One of the most effective programs is Weight Watchers because of the group meetings and the weigh-ins and the all the different things that they do as a community together to encourage each other. And they have one of the
Right.
highest success rates in getting people to their weight loss goals of any other programs. So it's kind of interesting when you mentioned about how difficult it can be to change one's diet. But I guess if the institutions start doing that for other reasons, like even the environmental reasons, like you were talking about, um, and is sustainability a concept found in Judaism, like the requirement that you should?
Very, very much so. Judaism understands, there's this wonderful rabbinic text that goes back a couple thousand years, and it's a story, if you will, of God taking Adam, the first human being, and walking Adam around the garden and saying, Garden of Eden, saying, "Look at all this stuff. Look at this. This stuff is great. This stuff is amazing. This stuff is beautiful. Don't screw it up." You got one shot at this. There's no other world after this, right? Basically, there's no planet B, right? So God takes Adam round and says, see all these wonderful works? It is for you to take care of, right? So that notion of sustainability is so ingrained in Jewish tradition. It's even in the name, right? So the first human being was Adam, right? The word Adam comes actually from the Hebrew word for earth, meaning Adamah, right? So even in what we call ourselves, we understand our link to the very earth that we walk on, right? So sustaining this is meant to be, from a Jewish perspective, an intuitive and obvious thing that we're meant to do. I mean, God has to go and teach it because maybe it's not so intuitive and obvious, but it is seen as being an essential part of how it is we're meant to relate. We're not here to simply use up the world's resources. The world wasn't given to us for us to do whatever we want. The world is a gift. Our time here is a gift, and we're meant to treat it with the same kind of respect and reverence that we would treat any gift that comes our way.
Okay. But this like actually was like you're saying like a gift from God to every creature on the earth was this. And there's no like that was interesting. You said there's no planet B. You said like to
Right,
just like go run off to like you drain everything out of this world and then you go and you do it to the
right.
next one. That kind of um doesn't sound quite right.
Right,
So
exactly. Exactly. That's the thing. It doesn't sound right. You just know. You just know intuitively. Like that's the thing. You can't really think that that's the way we're meant to relate to this world. Now there'll be and I don't think anybody does. Right. I think a whole bunch of people have either believe and or have convinced themselves that when it comes to the use of resources, it is unlimited. It is truly unlimited. There's no way we're going to tap out of these resources. I think there's a limit. I think with some of these resources, there's definitely a limit. And look, that limit might not be 10 years from now. That limit might be 20 years from now. That limit could be 100 years now. That limit could be 200 years from now. But Judaism, you got to understand, in Judaism, 200 years is a blink of an eye. We've been around too long. 200 years, that ain't a long-term plan. 200 years, that's kind of still in the present,
mhm.
right? So Judaism looks and requires us to understand the earth as an eternal gift to all of our children in every generation that follows. And each generation is meant to understand and be able to present the world to the other for them to be able to tend it, nourish, and flourish.
Right. Okay. No, that sounds really cool. And so basically like and if you and you know if people cherish that gift and they take care of it, that's kind of like a big part of it is to actually that's what the original I guess plan was it said just for the humans to take care of the earth like God takes care of us.
All right. As God says in that story with Adam, there ain't no one after us.
That's
No one
interesting.
after us is going to take care of it.
So it's actually up to humanity. And I know like there are there is so much science about how much destruction humanity has already done to like the world in terms of just to start with the smallest animals would be like the insects. They've
Mhm.
suffered like a huge reduction since the 1970s when people started measuring them by like like the volume things like they would put like traps and stuff and like just compare the volume year to year, and it's a lot less now. That they catch in their traps, and we there was actually one article that we had published about the lantern flies. You guys don't have that there. Do you guys have that there? No,
Yeah. No,
because
no, we
they're
don't.
like these supposedly invasive bugs from China, and they've been brought over
Mhm.
on like pallets and stuff. And we're told that if you see them, you have to kill them And there was an article that we had republished about how that's actually you're not allowed to do that in the Jewish tradition. You can't kill them, even if because they're, I don't remember the exact arguments that it gave, but it basically said don't you that Jewish people should not kill the lanternflies, even if they tell you to. It's something that they need to do.
And then look, and with those kinds of things, you have to weigh sort of damage that can be done versus, destroying something, right? And if those lantern flies were going to be wreak the kind of damage, not just destroying a tree or two or here or there, but like serious damage, well, then human beings can protect themselves,
Hmm.
right? So it's human beings, from the point of view of Jewish tradition, human beings are not meant to be pacifists throughout every element of their life, right? We have an obligation to take care of ourselves. The problem is, you know, what is taking care of ourselves and what is taking care of others in a proper balance, right? One of the things that I think is really telling in terms of how out of balance we are is we are the apex predator to every single creature in this planet.
Hmm.
We are the worst thing that has happened to most every species.
Hmm.
Not all, but most of them.
Right. And they've actually
Dogs
called
may be the
this
exception.
the dog, dogs are the exception, you said.
Well, dogs may be the exception, but then you look at dog shelters and you're like, human beings don't even deserve dogs,
Right. Yeah, that was
right? Don't even deserve dogs. So no, we're kind of, in this weird position where from the point of view, at least of Jewish tradition, we're meant to tend and take care of to ensure that all can flourish. And yet we become the worst thing for so many other creatures and so
right.
many other species.
Right.
That's a balance that doesn't seem to be in line.
Right. Right. And they actually have been calling this period of time when humans have existed the Anthropocene age, I believe it's called, which is like
Yeah,
essentially the age of human extinctions that the humans have inflicted on the other creatures of the earth. Is there's so many animals we didn't even know existed that are already extinct because of things that humans have done. And that
right.
that too is like goes back to your sustainability, what you were talking about before, is if you kill all the other creatures, eventually it will get to the people. Like eventually it goes up the food chain regardless of, because there's pollinators that were dying and stuff like that. So it's kind of like um but even from the sustainability that you were talking about before, it's like there's only one planet, like it is not infinite. Like, and you were saying like even if it lasts like 200 years, I don't know, is that what they're saying? That is, oh, it's as good as long as it lasts 200 years.
I don't know, but I'm saying even if you were to think that, that doesn't it doesn't matter. You could say, well, it's not. It's going to last for 1,000 years. Okay, that's still not enough. That's not enough from Jewish point of view of time.
Because at the
That's
end of
that's
that
that's
1,000 years, it's kind of sucked dry and there's
right.
nothing
That
left. It's like
like
an
just
empty husk.
right. And so look. I mean, obviously, conceptually, I'm not saying the world is going to become that in 1,000 years. I'm just saying, as a thought experiment, if you think that way and you come to these conclusions, then again, from a point of view of Jewish tradition, it's like, well, that conclusion in and of itself shows the problem, right? If you're thinking to yourself, well, it'll last for here, unless it lasts for everybody, then it's not enough. We're obligated to every generation that comes after us in the same way that every generation before us was obligated to us and to our future.
Mhm, mhm. And I guess when I was talking about the kosher dietary laws, I was specifically referring to in the meat industry, like how they're supposed to, with the blood and the other technical issues of after in Genesis. That was Genesis 9. Yeah, Genesis 9.
Right.
So the kind
Yeah.
of kosher dietary laws that were related specifically to the eating of meat and the eating of animals are those really possible to keep with the way that they run the slaughterhouses? Like, I know that you were mentioning like they have to give them antibiotics, right? So that they're not sick. And then, but that's because they're really dirty. Like to say, I guess to
Yeah,
put it
they have to
mildly.
cramped conditions, it's not sanitary. Yeah.
So if it
Yeah.
was
So look,
sanitary, go ahead. I'm sorry.
in, an- in answer to your question, no, I don't think you can keep kosher um, and buy things that come from a factory farm, right? That meat is not kosher as far as I'm concerned, right? And it's not kosher, and it's not kosher because the system itself, the size of the system, the industrial scale of the system is such, and the emphasis on speed and efficiency, it is simply impossible to maximize profits the way they're trying to do and do so in a manner that is befitting of Jewish tradition.
And you were
You just they have to produce too much meat. The pressures of the system itself and the demand make it impossible to really achieve.
mhm. And you were also you mentioned briefly pollution um, with
Mm,
regard to like factory farms. Um, I know
oh
that
yeah.
most people don't have any idea about that, and they might have seen like there were like these videos that were kind of put out by supposed scientists who it turned out were like funded by the meat industry. So it's kind of like um, they were saying that that they don't generate waste, but most people know that they do because when you have that many cows or chickens or anything in that small of a space, they do generate a lot of waste that needs to be, disposed of, I guess.
Yeah. Where do you think all the poop goes?
Well, where does it go? I mean, I guess it goes in the waterways.
Yeah. I mean, they have these huge lagoons, right,
Okay.
next to this farm, right, where they dump the waste and then they take it and they spray it, right, to kind of disperse it, right? There are stories of people who live near these factory farms, chicken farms, pig farms, cow farms, and so forth, and what it smells like around these places, right? And the way that the waste is tended to and how it's eventually a lot of it goes into or gets drained into the water and gets into our systems, right? And is not cleaned properly. It's not processed in a way that it should. And by the way, you know who pays for that?
Is it the taxpayers and
You and me. Yeah, you and me. Business ain't paying
subsidies?
for it. They're not paying for the damage of the runoff. Uh-uh. That cost gets transferred to us,
Right.
right? So
And
we
then,
talk about how efficient the system is and how it produces cheap meat. Only cheap because they ain't paying for all the damage they do.
right. Right. And I know like when there's a rainstorm, the lagoons run off into
Flood.
the local waterways, and that's just part of what happens. That's kind of how they get rid of it, I
Yeah.
guess. And
And listen, the burping and farting alone of these animals and the methane that it produces, right, is its own kind of pollution, in this case, air pollution, right? Because if 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 cows were taken together and the methane they produced were taken together and sort of added together, they produce as much methane as the United States and China,
okay.
two massive industrial countries. Cows in our world are the third largest producers of methane. And methane, when it comes to climate change, is incredibly problematic. Carbon dioxide is kind of like the icing on the carbon cake, or not on the climate cake. In terms of impact on climate, methane is massive. There's a huge, huge impact. And the way that we eat and the manner in which we eat simply increases the amount of methane that we're putting into the system. So the pollution manifests in a number of different ways.
hmm hmm And also there's one of the things that they do in factory farms, from my understanding, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to feed the cows the dead cows that had died in mixed in with their other feed. I don't know if they still do that
Right.
anymore. I would assume that they do. And so cows who are being fed a diet that they're not biologically designed to digest would presumably make more methane than a cow that's eating just oats or grass or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, and actually, when you talk about cows and their diet, huge amount of their diet, actually, interestingly enough, is corn, which they're not designed to eat either.
Okay. Nope, they're not designed to eat. And I guess that's because the corn is so cheap. Is it like that's cheaper than actual grain that they can actually eat?
I believe so, yeah.
And so that becomes like a kind of cutting corners, kind of going back to what you were saying before about taking care of your own the livestock and stuff like that that people have or that people in the past had. They're supposed to take care of their animals before themselves. So like they're just giving them the cheapest possible feed that they're not even designed for. So I actually didn't know that about the corn. That's really interesting too. From that perspective too, where a lot of people have said from a religious perspective that you're supposed to take care of your body in the best way possible. And as it turns out, that just happens to be a plant-based diet rather than, having like, meats and stuff like that.
Right. Though, and one of the reasons why I didn't want to answer that question is just to give you a little bit of background sense where I'm coming from is look, are there health benefits? Yes, but are they guaranteed? No. That I changed my diet. Right. So tell me, what are the health benefits? You come to me and you say, oh, there's health benefits, and then I do this, and then it doesn't happen. I start thinking like, hey, what's going on here? So the problem with the health benefits as a sort of a from our point of view as a talking point when we're trying to convince people and convince, more importantly, institutions, is we tread very lightly on the health benefits because health is so personal, right? And so and just so inconsistent in some ways. Are there benefits there? Yes, yes, yes. Does it play out universally in the same way, sort of like a formula? Unfortunately, not.
Um, so, is there anything else that you wanted to add, kind of that we didn't really talk about today with regard to this topic?
I would just say the following. It it is really hard to change. It's really hard to change in general. It is exceptionally hard to change one's diet. And changing our diets is one of the most fundamental ways that you and I can have an impact on a number of different challenges that are going on in our world. You can drive an electric car, you can get solar panels, right? You can recycle, but none of those things are going to address the climate crisis in the same way that changing our diets will. In addition, we live in a particularly cruel world right now, a particularly harsh world. And I think any opportunity that we have to bring a little bit of kindness and compassion into this world should be jumped on. And so, what I would also suggest is that this is a way that we can do that. This is a way where we can show ourselves that we can be vessels of light and kindness and love. And I'm not even advocating that everybody become, vegan overnight, right? And I would be the first to say that I don't even think of Judaism as being a vegan tradition. But I think it is a tradition that demands of us to be compassionate. And in that sense, we have to reflect upon all areas of our life, including how we consume the resources of this world, and ask ourselves whether we're living up to that. And
Well,
it's hard. And we'll all make mistakes and mess up as we do it. But I think it's a challenge that all of us have to take.
right, right. Well, I think this was a really great conversation, and it was really good to speak to you. And I think that that our readers who are interested in this topic will probably get a lot out of this because there's so many different reasons to even, yes, it's hard, but there are sometimes really hard things that you want to do. Like most things in life that people ended up really doing and that they didn't expect it maybe it was hard, it's hard to build a business, it's hard to go to school, it's hard to do all of these things. It's good to challenge yourself and to try because the it seems like from all of the stuff that we talked about it's really worthwhile to kind of try to bring that original plan back to Earth, like where everybody is taking care of everyone else.
Right. And if not be able to bring it back to this world, at least have it as a North Star as this is worthy of who we are and who we want to be as people to strive towards.
Right. Right. Well, it was really, really good to speak to you.